Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're checking out Human Nature and the Family of Blood. Second two-part story of season 3. I've gone on record saying this is my favorite 10th Doctor story. I don't think that's an unpopular choice.
Yeah.
And on this rewatch, it really holds up. I think this story is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought so too. I think when we did 42, we were wondering, is this going to be a 10? Is this going to be, Cuff's first 10 of the show? Obviously, we'll wait till we get to the end of this, but
Yeah.
there were many moments where I thought, is this worth a 10? But, there are just so many good parts about this story.
Yeah.
There's so... I don't know if I can think of many flaws in terms of most of the elements here. I mean, maybe some of the effects look dated, but even then, they work well enough for the episode, and most of the effects are practical, and they look pretty
Yeah.
neat. They're goofy as shit sometimes, but still, they look quite real, and the scarecrows are always good fun.
Yeah. I'll tell you why I hold this story in high regard.
Mhm.
Like, obviously, there's many reasons, but here's the main one. Doctor Who is a show that can do anything.
Hmm.
So when it does something that it's never done before, and really never can again, I'm annoyed when it doesn't fully commit and, like, really explore everything that it can with that premise. And this is an episode that does that. It goes all the way in examining this story concept.
Yeah.
And everyone gets the most out of it. It's a fantastic showcase of David Tennant's acting. It's probably his best performance in the show so far.
Yeah,
It's a great episode for Martha.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
A
quite
great
good for her
villain
as well.
episode. It's a great side character episode. It's a great theme episode.
Yeah, as actually one of the things that struck me about it was this is probably one of the most, I guess you'd say, thematically mature episodes of Doctor Who, certainly that we've covered so far. It gets, obviously it's dark, but it's just very, the themes they're exploring here and the way they're exploring them, obviously, as a show and even as a couple of episodes, it's more geared to a younger audience, but it's so mature, for want of a better word. You could put themes like this in, God, I don't know, like in a thematically complex anime series, or some sort of existential, um, 70s auteur New American cinema movie, and it would still work pretty well. The fact that they pull it off as well as they do here is testimony to the strength of, obviously, the writing of this story, but kind of the strength of the show generally. I recently rewatched a brief interview with Sidney Newman where he says, when he was trying to find, so he was talking about Verity Lambert, he said he needed to find somebody who could sort of tap into the innate silliness of Doctor Who, but also understand the seriousness that's part of it. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's basically what he was saying. And I've said it before. The tension in the show is between the out and out, nutty, over the top, wacky antics, and the astonishingly serious themes that occur in it. And you see this even in something as ridiculous as I think The Chase, because there are a couple of moments there where I was surprised how full on and serious it got. But this story really embodies that tension in the best way, because you have ridiculous stuff. The glowing green light, the weird smoke that the family uses to enter the human vessels, the scarecrows, the melodramatic direction and the music and even some of the editing. And of course the performances. I mean, it's Harry Lloyd who plays Baines, right? He's
Yeah.
having a great time.
Look, I
Um,
want to touch on Harry Lloyd first. I
sure.
adore this performance.
Yeah, it's great.
He just puts absolutely everything into it. Like I said, he's like on like the first time you watch it, it's just like it's really creepy. Obviously, the way he's
Mm.
just like twisting his face at everything. But I really love that as like a portrayal of somebody inhabiting a body that is foreign to them and attempting to work the foreign uh, muscles and that into something that is familiar to them.
And there's even a kind of a lovely air of satire or mockery that he embodies in his performance, because he's like, yeah, he's doing his best interpretation of a human, but it's really clear that he hates humans and thinks that they're scum. So he's kind of making fun of what he thinks this person is, which is just kind of great. It's
Yeah,
highly
it's
entertaining
it's
and
so great
layered.
as well that in an episode or in a story rather that is like it's not lacking in standout performances.
Mm,
Um, obviously, I think that David Tennant's performance is the top in this episode, but
yeah.
for Harry Lloyd to come in at a close second, even alongside Martha
Mm,
and Jessica Hines
mm,
and all these other fantastic actors, it really says something
mm,
how
mm.
great he is in this role.
Yep. I think in a way it's kind of that sort of perfect amalgam of acting and writing, because
Yeah,
again he kind of lends himself to an over the top performance again, because you've got this horrible sort of parody of human life
mm,
embodied in that performance, so that Harry Lloyd can go kind of almost like Malcolm McDowell, Clockwork Orange levels of sort of cartoonishness and wickedness that he's embodying there. So it's obviously just on a surface level very entertaining watching him be smarmy and mocking everybody around him, and being sort of vicious and even maniacal. But there's always that layer
mm,
to it, that you get the feeling that you know unsurprisingly there's something beneath the surface there. There's a tension which I really enjoy. Um,
yeah,
and that actually, and I'll probably talk about this in more detail later, but I just want to bring up briefly, in terms of the themes explored
yeah,
here, I think the two big ones that they're exploring are transformation and duality, and I think they do that really well in basically every element in the story, in terms of the writing, in terms of performances, um, even in terms of some of the special effects. I think, um, yeah, like those themes are explored so well, and that, I think, for me is what elevates the story. Because yes, it's got all the other great elements, great plot, great characters, but those themes and the way they're expressed are what I think make this story really magic.
yeah. Yeah, certainly, and a lot of that, and we might as well get this out of the way. A lot of
Mm,
that comes through with David Tennant and his characterization of
yeah,
John Smith.
yeah,
It would be so incredibly easy to just play the Doctor, but as a human,
yeah,
and he doesn't do that. He plays John Smith.
yeah,
Like the affectations are different. He even does a slightly different accent for it, which is
yeah,
difficult to like spot initially. But like,
yeah.
there's a certain cadence that
Yeah,
is not of the Doctor.
he sounds slightly more posh and precise when he's John Smith, which is very
Yeah,
funny. But that makes sense because he's being this sort of you know school teacher type in 1913.
yeah,
But
and it's also
yeah, go.
like, well, the other thing is like just the character of John Smith and the different ways that like seeing him just like straight up holding a cane is a bit of a shock, and the fact that he is like so like he doesn't even give it a second thought when he's like, oh, one of my students wants to beat one of my other students. Yeah,
Mm,
go ahead. But then he's also almost characterized to be more like emotionally vulnerable
Mm.
than the Doctor is. Like, not
Oh
just
yeah.
to Nurse Redfern, but also like his transparency with Martha and
Yeah.
all that other stuff. Like, it's that duality that you were talking about there.
Yeah. And there's
And
even like even the way he interacts with Timothy, that's the name of the young
yeah,
boy, isn't it? Yeah.
yes, it
There's
is.
a even early on, I can't remember the exact scene, but there is a vulnerability there, as you say, which is really kind of special.
Yeah,
And what also I think should be said is it's such an interesting thing, and like so I talked about duality and but transformation as well, because it's almost like he's obviously being John Smith, but it's almost like he's genuinely fighting to keep the Doctor side sort of repressed, because there's just these tiny elements in the performance, and not even the more obvious ones, where the Doctor's almost shining through, but that sort of battle is still there, which is really special.
yeah,
Um, Especially given how, as you say, how one-dimensional that performance could have been.
yeah. I mean, like I said, it just would have been so easy to just play the Doctor, but like give it the human, like deliver the human lines that way. But that's not what they do. And
Mm,
like the directing, the writing, the acting, it's
mm,
all just fucking magnificent. And I think that is why the last like 20 minutes of the story is such like an emotional experience,
yeah.
because we've gotten to know this character as a distinct entity from the Doctor, so that when he goes
Mm,
away, it really does feel like a death.
yeah. I think you
And,
rightly
and
point.
actually a proper sacrifice as well.
Oh, for sure. No, that was that. I'll talk about that later on. But yeah, that was one
Yeah,
of the strongest parts in the whole story. Um, but I want to go back to something you've said before about David Tennant, which
yeah,
as we go on, I'm realizing more and more how true it is. I think you described David Tennant as the loneliest Doctor, and I'm
yeah,
really starting to get that, and
yeah.
that I think is the most true here, because we now see who the Doctor could be in a
Hmm.
way. Like
Yeah,
that, it's kind of great that they've picked up on the Doctor longing for an ordinary life quality,
mm,
and bringing it to the fore here with him as John Smith, because like obviously the 10th Doctor, like all Doctors, has a layer of compassion to him, but I think purely by contrast, this is when we really realize how lonely he is, how much he shuts down, ignores the very clear trauma and turmoil that's going on inside his head, and how he hides even from the people that are supposedly closest to him,
yeah,
because he does get so close with Nurse Redfern, and it just when we realize, oh, he's going to give that up now and become, the Doctor again, we're like, oh, yeah, maybe that's not a great thing, because that would condemn
well,
him to
for
that
me, and
lonely
I,
existence again.
and I don't want to jump ahead to the ending too much because we're
Mm.
going to be talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
But like this, it's also like super evident when like it's a really understated moment actually, because the main one obviously is when the nurse confronts him about would anyone here have died. We'll obviously delve into that a bit more later, and he has nothing to say to it. But then he's talking to Martha about it, and he's like, Chipper, okay, let's go. And Martha's like, this is clearly affecting you. I can talk to her. And he's like, no, we're leaving. And he's gone back to,
Mm.
that closing himself off thing, which John Smith
Mm.
wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
It's kind of bitter in that way.
It's also sort of jumping way ahead. It's also kind of satisfying to see that element, that story arc finalized with the 60th anniversary specials.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I know
completely.
we talked about that before with that story, but it really, that element of the Doctor wanting, an ordinary life, so to speak, that really comes to the fore there, which is just, you know, kind of great.
Yeah,
But as you
completely.
say, the bitterness is pretty palpable here,
Mm,
with the ending.
yeah. Um, it's kind of a travesty that we've been talking about this for a bit 10 minutes now, and we haven't discussed the fact that this was originally a novel for the Seventh Doctor. Um,
I would believe that. I know that's maybe a weird thing to say, but that sounds about
So
right. It
this
feels like a Cartmel master plan sort of a move.
Well, this was a 1995 book written by
All
Paul
right.
Cornell, who did write the episode that we're talking about today, and also
Mm.
wrote Father's Day, so his pedigree is strong.
Mm.
There are obviously heaps of changes to accommodate the new timeline of the show. I'm
Yeah.
just going to quickly go over some of the weirder ones from the book, at least like out of context
Fantastic.
ones. So, as John Smith, the Seventh Doctor also teaches at a school in Farringham.
Mm.
It does describe him as more emotionally available. He does briefly have a fling with Joan Redfern. In this instance, Farringham is attacked by something people call the Orbitides, or Obitides, or something like that, who assume the appearance of anything they eat.
Mm.
And the plot is similar. They're hunting down the Doctor to increase their lifespan.
Mm.
There's so it's actually there's no chameleon arch, but it's basically an aspect of the TARDIS that appears to the Doctor in the form of a vision of Verity, which something like that happens in this episode as well. Um, um, so John Smith chooses to sacrifice himself for Joan after a brief conversation with the Doctor, during which the Doctor told Smith that he did rather well in his time as the Doctor. Smith was taken by death.
Right. That's
So Smith at one point takes the death appears and takes John Smith away, which happens. In this version of the story, the Doctor doesn't transform into a human to escape the Obitides. In this version, he does so to better understand his companion Bernice's grief at the death of someone who was important to her. Feels a bit odd because by this point, the Doctor should be well aware of what grief is. There is another character. There is a character in the book called Timothy. In this case, Timothy Dean, who becomes infected with the Doctor's Time Lord DNA and gains a second heart and a respiratory bypass system. He is hanged by his classmates, but his second heart saves him.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck getting away with that on TV.
Yeah.
At least on a show like Doctor Who. Good lord.
There is a section where where John Smith plays cricket in the book. Joan's husband died in war. So yeah, there's a few differences, obviously, but it's not far off.
No, it sounds surprisingly close. Even the themes seem kind of similar.
In that sense, good adaptation.
Yeah, actually.
Talking of the briefly, I mentioned Joan's father dying in a war. That's the other thematic through line running through this, which is the impending Great War and the ethical concerns with teaching 12-year-olds to take up arms and kill.
Yeah, leading to I think I'd say one of my favorite moments of Revival Who that we've covered so far, which is the great battle between them and the Scarecrows and the wonderful use of the slow motion and the choir singing over it. And I thought that was interesting because in a weird way, because at that point the young boys, they assume that the Scarecrows are like living or something.
Yes.
So when they're killing them, quote unquote, it's like they're becoming a family of blood because they're bonded by blood, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense, yeah.
Which, given that we're also seeing them actively weeping while they're having to do this, is a really great foreshadowing to the absolute nightmare of the First World War that many of them would be heading to.
Yeah. But like, I
So
also love like they allude to it a couple times before that moment where it's like, oh, what's coming, and Joan's aversion to teaching them to kill.
Mm.
But one of my favorite moments of this entire thematic thing is when Son of Mine has that speech about, do you think they'll thank you? Will
oh
they
yeah,
at the end of all of it, will they turn around and thank the man who told them this was all good? Which is
yeah,
just incredible writing.
yeah. It's very Wilfred Owen, Dulce et Decorum Est.
Yeah, like, and it's such a stacked episode for
Mm.
like character discussion in terms
Mm.
of who the Doctor is, that this almost feels like something that shouldn't fit.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, they're already doing so much with the characterization that you wouldn't think they would have time for like an actual like nuanced discussion of war.
Yeah, the schoolmaster kind of hits back to saying, I use my dead friends as sandbags, which is quite a neat
It's
bit of
evocative.
poetry,
Yeah.
which is kind of great, but showing that it's like, two sides to an argument, but ultimately showing that he's foolish in what he's saying, because there is kind of, that cheap rationalization there. But yeah, I think you're right. It certainly is something that could have been explored either too much or too little, right?
Yeah.
Because I imagine in other Doctor Who stories, they would have devoted like half an episode to that topic, but they were able to sort of condense it down mainly with that moment, which is kind of great.
Well, they also give an opposing viewpoint with Timothy at the end of the story where he says to them, a war's coming and we're going to have to fight. And Martha says, you could get hurt. And he says, well, so could you. It's not going to stop you, though. And it's like such a very quick way of being like, look, I understand, but like, not all of us, like some of us will fight because we think it's the right thing to do.
Mm.
And like, while obviously it doesn't justify sending children into an active war zone, it is kind of like there is more of it. Like it's not just like an out and out war is bad episode. There is a more active and nuanced take that this story presents, down to the ending being full on like essentially what ends up being a Remembrance Day tribute at the end of this episode with an elderly Tim like in wheelchair bound at a war memorial, in a scene that every single time makes me tear up for some reason. And I don't know why. I don't know anyone who is or has been a soldier. As far as I know, I don't have any family who fought in any wars. My dad was in the Navy, but he never fought in any battles. And I don't know why. Just like maybe it's just because of like something about old men like crying is something that maybe gets me, and like a wholesome crying. Maybe it's just the fact that like we see the Doctor and Martha like acknowledging him for his service as the speaker delivers that speech. I don't know. It's just something that always gets me, and it's something that, look, it's not trying to justify a war is good speech or like it's not trying to justify a war is good outlook on the episode, but it's doing war may be bad, but the people who fought are still heroes, especially in World War One.
I think it's just sort of generally evocative, and I mean, and this maybe is a bit obvious, but the fact that it does come at the end, and that we're seeing, the much later stages of Timothy's life, because we don't find out what happens to forgotten his name, but his friend that he was in combat with. Sorry?
Hutchison.
Yes, Hutchison. We don't know exactly what happened. It's possible he died in war, but the point is that that friendship is still strong, and that it still lasted that whole time, and that it in a way began when Timothy saw that vision, and maybe that's also why he said, I'm gonna stay and fight because he knew he could see himself on the front line saving Hutchison from, what I assume was an exploding shell. But yeah. So I think your reaction is totally understandable. It's a very in a story that is about grief in a lot of ways, especially given that we've just had to see, John Smith sort of almost died, really.
Yeah.
I think, getting a bit misty-eyed over a scene like that makes complete sense.
I suppose. The character Timothy is also an interesting one. I've seen a lot of
Yeah.
He's played by Thomas Sangster, who is an incredible actor in his own right.
Yeah.
It's another character in the show who has sort of a latent psychic ability that the show never really cares to address in any meaningful way. I guess just in the world of Doctor Who, some characters are just mildly psychic.
Yeah, there's a part of me that wanted an explanation to that a little bit, and I thought, oh, is this like the opening of the watch? Is this meant to be like a reference to the Master? But then I realized, no, there's no way that.
No.
Like, if Timothy was like somehow connected with the Master, I would have remembered, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, it's just some people just have psychic powers. The weird thing is, though, the way Doctor Who works, I can just believe that. Like,
Well,
they
it's
are
well
taking a
established by
risk.
this point, right?
Yeah, that certain people have, and not just like, phony psychic powers, but like
Yeah.
actual connections to either alien species or alien technology. I can't think of any like specific examples at the moment, but I'm sure we've come across other characters who are like that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really hurt the episode, and not just because there's so many other things happening in the story, like the way it's constructed in the greater world building of the show still really works, which is kind of great.
Yeah. And one of the main criticisms I've seen of the episode is like, why does he take the watch? Why does he keep it hidden? If he just returned it, none of this would be happening. But like the episode explains it pretty well when it's saying like, he sees the watch, he's drawn to it, he picks it up, and the watch tells him to keep him hidden. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's the One Ring thing, right?
Yeah,
If
well,
you
essentially, yeah.
put the ring on, the scary alien Nazgul are gonna find you.
But also, it's like the watch is essentially the watch is the Doctor telling Timothy what to do.
Yeah.
And when he hears that voice saying, "Keep me hidden,"
Then he
that's what he
knows to
does.
follow it.
Yeah, and it's clearly in that case the Doctor's being like, the family are here. If I'm unleashed onto John Smith too quickly, the family will just like raid the school and everyone in it in order to get to the Doctor. So for now, you have to keep them guessing. Like, and then when the moment is right, return me. Like, yeah, I totally buy that.
Yeah, same. I think that that's kind of one of the best parts about the story. There's a tension because you think, oh, just get the watch, give it to him. But then you realize, oh no, there's serious risk here. And if it does open too quickly, all could be lost, right? So as frustrating as it is, you're also kind of hoping, yeah, maybe they shouldn't find it. And at least as long as Timothy's got it, then maybe it's not so bad. So I think it works. I can almost understand that argument because it's like, yeah, like on a level of simplicity, why wouldn't you, get to the watch sooner? But for the way the story is constructed, it still works perfectly. I think I don't find any issues with that element.
Well, it's also because he manages to use the watch in effective ways throughout the second half of the story. Like, he uses it to briefly distract the family so that Martha can disarm one of them. And then he uses it a couple times later to scare away Daughter of Mine and then draw the family away from the rest of the students. Like, he's using it well, so, like, yeah, let him have it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Speaking of the family, we've talked about Harry Lloyd, but we haven't really talked about them as villains yet. Like, they're not gonna win any awards for, like, compelling, or like at the very least, uh, like emotionally resonant character motives. Like they're not like a misunderstood villain like working
No.
through something. But
I
for
mean, at
what they
least their
are,
motivation is clear and makes sense, right?
it's clear
They're trying to
motivation. It
live
makes
forever. Yeah.
sense. Yeah, it's clear motivation. It makes sense. So like that's fine. Like they're not. They don't. For this story, I would honestly be kind of insulted if they did try to pull a misunderstood or at least like respected villain, or like a redemption arc for them. I don't think
Yeah.
this story needs that. Um,
No. There's
but
too
they
much
are
going
like
on anyway.
too much going on, and especially for their fate. But
Yeah.
they are like suitably creepy, suitably threatening. They cause like real damage on a scale not often seen by like a one-story villain. Like they basically
Mm.
level an entire village and
Yeah.
do not do so with a hint of remorse.
Hmm.
And there's also elements of body horror, obviously, in the possession of the innocent villagers.
Hmm.
It's actually quite with Baines. It's there for the contrast to see him like go from this like sort of like almost prissy in a weird way,
Mm.
uh, like like bully obviously and racist, but like a gentle natured. Like he walks around with his hands like up by his like you almost see
Yeah,
him
like
doing like a
he's almost a feat in the
yeah,
way
like
he.
he goes from incredibly mild mannered to like incredibly sinister very quickly. But then after that, there's the emotional gut punch when they possess Jenny,
Mm.
because we get to know Jenny. She's like Martha's only friend,
Yeah.
and we get to know her pretty well. And then when she's gone, it kind of hurts.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Again, like we talk about how many things the story is doing, but to make us care enough about that character so that we feel a loss in a story that already has a lot going on in it is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
And you definitely feel that gut punch, which is kind of great.
yeah.
There's this one bit. What's the name of the woman who plays her? Because I can't.
I'll look it up.
Yeah. Um. Well, either way, there's this one bit, and I can't remember what she says exactly, but she does this really frightening thing where she,
It's Rebecca Staton.
yeah, Rebecca Staton. She does this really frightening thing where she kind of just gesticulates her face when she's talking to Martha as she's walking towards the camera, and it's
Yeah,
genuinely frightening.
I know the exact moment you're talking about. It's
Yeah.
the start of Family of Blood where Martha's trying
Mm.
to figure out what happened to Jenny, and she's going into like excruciating detail on what
Mm.
she did to her.
Yeah. And that really unsettled me. Like that's a
Yeah.
genuinely uncanny moment.
Mhm. It's another really great performance in a
For
story full
sure.
of them.
Yeah, for sure. Also, a funny little thing, and this sort of is a testament to Murray Gold, but um, Sister of Mine's theme is
Mhm.
similar to the one that the young girl from Remembrance of the Daleks has,
Oh, great.
which is that's just kind of funny, I think.
Sure, yeah.
Um, but yeah, even her performance is pretty good, given that
It's all right, yeah.
yeah, like she's not a massive focus. She's doing a good job, I think. Um, all of the actors who are playing the Family of Blood, they certainly feel pretty chilling. Like obviously, Harry Lloyd is kind of the highlight, but they're all doing, their part really well. I thought.
Yeah. This brings us kind of neatly onto Martha, who
Mm, mm,
really like, and this is probably unintentional foreshadowing for the finale, but she carries a lot of this like the duty and responsibility for like carrying out the Doctor's plan on her shoulders in this one, but the
yeah,
Doctor like obviously being unable to.
yeah.
And like, goddamn, she's such an excellent companion. Like
Mm,
she does so goddamn much. She's
mm,
able to talk the Family of Blood into lowering their weapons to clear everyone out. Um, she obviously stands by the Doctor the entire time, even when he's being really rather mean to her, to make sure that he stays safe.
mm,
Um, here's the main thing I want to highlight. She gets a little jealous of Nurse Redfern, like at certain points, especially when she's in the TARDIS talking to
Yeah.
herself, essentially. But at no point does she let that impact how she treats Nurse Redfern.
Yeah.
You know, she keeps the whole thing civil, despite being clear contenders for the same heart.
And also, by the way, despite the fact that Nurse Redfern, like many people in the world that they're in, is being really fucking racist to her.
Yeah, I would describe Nurse Redfern's racism as like a casual product of the times racism.
Oh yeah, no, well that's kind of the brilliance of the way it's worked into the story. It shows, I think, kind of how insidious racism is, because Nurse Redfern is generally a very kind and caring person, but she's still limited. She's limited by the horrible racist perspective that she's clearly been raised in. But it's also, it works in the sense that we see her overcome that and really sort of have to work to overcome that. And we see it, I mean, it has to happen pretty quickly, because by that point, you know, the story's getting in, you know, final high octane mode, but it's still gradual enough to make it really satisfying and thinking, yes, you know, good for you, Nurse Redfern, you overcame your dumb, nasty bullshit. So, yeah.
It's not even like it's. I don't remember many moments where she's like actively hostile towards Martha in that way. It's mainly the moment where she's like, you know, no one of your color could be a doctor. And that's mainly because of like a predisposed, well, none of the universities are admitting anyone of your color.
I think there are, I don't know.
And there's probably also like a hidden subtext of like, you know, I've been educated to believe that people that look like me are generally more intelligent than people who look like you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's also just little moments about like the way
there's a lot of like small microaggressions, especially from like there's one particularly like where John Smith cites cultural differences and like really baby talk Martha into being like, look, let me teach you the difference between fiction and reality for a moment.
Yes, this is a story. Jesus Christ.
And good lord, on the heels of the Shakespeare Code, isn't it great to see a historical Doctor Who episode with Martha Jones as the companion nail what, like, this kind of storytelling?
Yeah.
You know, like, so also, great. Because Martha, for a lot of this story, does walk around like she owns the place. And, you know, everyone treats her the same as they would. Eat that, Shakespeare Code.
And it also comes out in it's handled like in quite a nuanced way as well in some areas. I think particularly there's one great bit of dialogue where where Martha's she says, "Oh, not everyone's that considerate with me being a Londoner." Yeah, Londoner. It reminds me, there's a very similar line in Oppenheimer, actually, where him and a physicist friend of his, they're traveling through Europe in the 1920s, and he's like, "Oh, do you ever get the feeling that," and they're both Jewish, and he's like, "Oh, do you ever get the feeling that our kind aren't welcome around here?" And the other guy says, "Oh, you mean physicists?" Yeah. So yeah, good for this story for tackling these issues pretty well, in my view.
Yeah.
Nice contrast.
Yep, great contrast, right? One story actually knows what it's doing. One other thing I wanted to mention with Martha is like her like genuinely quite clever way of deducing that Jenny is gone when she like does the whole thing with like, "Do you want some tea? Well, I put a bit of gravy in for you. Would you like that?" Just to see if like Jenny goes along with it.
Yeah,
it's just like a really really smart play, and
yeah, again, there's a lot of subtlety there. Like it's that great, you know, show don't tell. It just it really works. Which you know, in a show that is you know, Doctor Who isn't the most famous for its subtlety. That's I think I very much appreciate that. Which is great.
And just finishing my earlier point, the way that
Mm,
the tact that she behaves in like around Nose Redfern and like treating us with civility and
mm.
that, it's a good thing that Rose wasn't the companion for this story because she would not be able to resist getting at least once biting comment and being like, "Well, I'm gonna go away with him at the end of all this, and you're gonna be alone." So
Who are you, Nurse Redfern? You're just a bloody human from the 1910s.
your head's you're literally living in the past, Nurse Redfern.
Anyway,
Moving on. Speaking of Nurse Redfern,
mm,
played by Jessica Hines, she and David Tennant would later partner up again in a show called, I think it's called There She Goes or There She Is or something to that effect.
huh,
And it's a show where they're a married couple raising a daughter with Down syndrome.
cool.
From what I've seen, that's a good show as well.
Ah, good.
Um, and like they've got great chemistry here. I'll say that from the start. Like
Yeah,
from
yeah,
their first interaction, you can tell that they're like oddly a really good fit for each other. Like both John Smith and Nurse Redfern are like they're both the exact level of like adorably awkward. I'm gonna say.
yeah,
I'm gonna phrase it in that way.
yeah, yeah,
Like the way that they sort of like bounce off each other in a really similar way. It's a very upper middle class British awkwardness, which I
yeah.
quite actually quite find it endearing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I'll tell you something else about it. I think there's kind of a deeper layer to uh that chemistry where they both are definitely restricted by the
Yeah.
social limitations of their age, and you can see this
Yes.
with the doctor encouraging one of the other students to beat another one, or
Yep.
Nurse Redfern and her racism, but they both, on some level, realize that this is not the way to be. They
Yes.
want a life that's better than that, and
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things that kind of draws them together, which is really quite great. And I don't doubt that this is a deliberate thing, but it's a very human sort of relationship, which is kind of great.
Yeah, and it's her opposition to teaching the children to fight that
Mm.
initially sets her apart from just being a love interest. Like the fact that she's like willing to oppose John Smith and like
Yeah,
have a proper dialogue with him.
yeah. I think I appreciate that quite a lot. I
Yeah.
think I hate to keep coming back to this, but um we've discussed, I think, to a certain extent, the fact that there's a fair amount of sort of doctor companion romancing in the Moffat era,
Yeah.
which I'm not fond of for a number of reasons.
Well, also
Um,
like we've seen plenty of it in the RTD era as well. Let's not pretend it's just a
that's
Moffat
no, no,
thing.
no, oh no, that's true. Like it's definitely there, and RTD was, basically started it. Um, I just find it a bit more intense,
Sure.
shall we
Yeah.
say, in the Moffat era. So,
Yeah,
but
I
so
agree.
having this sort of character, obviously forming an attachment to the Doctor and falling in love with him, but having enough sort of layers, as you say, to kind of push back against him, to have a dialogue. It's there's just I don't know, there's just nuance there that I really appreciate. Um, yeah, it's kind of great.
Yeah. Um, and the fact that she's like, she's not so blinded by her infatuation with John Smith that she's not willing to ask questions about
Yeah,
him.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
there's that great scene where she's like, "Where did you grow up? Don't stop speaking to me like you're reading out of a textbook. Give me
yeah,
details." Where she's
yeah,
like, she doesn't want to believe it, but she's like,
yeah.
she's
She's
actively
realizing.
looking. Well,
Yeah.
she's desperately searching for something that will clear the doubt,
Oh
essentially.
yeah, she's searching for that rationalization, which doesn't really come. Um,
Yeah, but she's not approaching it from a like I believe like given what she'd already seen, she's believing Martha, but she's like trying to find something that will prove Martha wrong in that instance. She's not going at it from
yeah,
the other way, which
yeah,
I think is easier to do.
yeah. Um, yeah, she's got a really good character arc through this
Yeah,
story. And she's more integral, I think, in this plot than many other sort of not similar characters, but other side characters are, I guess, in other Doctor Who stories, and that makes sense because it's human nature, but it's just really refreshing to see so much thought put into a side character like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it all stems from the fact that she is ultimately like the center of John Smith's moral dilemma by the end of the story. Like, obviously, he
Yeah.
enjoys his life as John Smith,
But she's kind of the core. She really
but
anchors
she's the
the
core.
John
Yeah.
Smith persona.
I have a feeling that if he had never met Nurse Redfern, his debate as to whether or not to change back at the end of the story would not be nearly as pained
Oh, for sure.
and desperate.
For sure, because
Um,
and like obviously the romance is there, but it's kind of more than that because she is so human and represents what a human life is and how enticing that is to the Doctor and John Smith. So
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
it's
this leads us to that big, like
mm,
the big conversation that they have in the house, and David Tennant's giving it his all. He's
yeah,
like, he's yelling at Martha. He's rationalizing. He has that brilliant moment of like for 5 seconds snapping back into the Doctor and then jumping straight back to John Smith again.
yeah.
Um,
And then
and
the
it's all
realization of, oh, this is who this person is, and this
yeah,
is who I am.
a couple of times. Yeah, there are a few moments like that. Um, and I love that ultimately the thing that makes Nurse Redfern's decision, obviously she doesn't make the decision for him, but there's a moment where she sort of resigns herself to this is probably what's going to happen and what needs to happen. It's when she learns that the family would become immortal, and she phrases it like a war across the stars for every child, and she brings it right back to um, that like pivotal conversation they have in the village about children learning to fight,
Yeah.
and what is now a core value that they share upon having John Smith having watched the the great moment of the gunning down of the Scarecrow people.
Yeah.
And like the specific this I just really appreciate the specific callback to a war across the stars for every child.
Yeah.
In
There's
that
such
moment.
there's that kind of raw vulnerability that
Yeah,
every person in the audience is gonna identify with.
but not just that, but like it's the thematic linking of this moral dilemma to one
Oh,
of the major like
the
discussion
greatest
points of
yeah,
this story.
yeah, and the great conflict of World War One. It's sort of it's great in lies in such a great way. Especially I think in a show like
Yeah,
Doctor Who, where the setting it's often I
it's
wouldn't say most of the
incidental
time
often.
it's pointless, but it's not used in as integral a way as it could be, right? You sometimes
No,
get the
yeah.
impression, especially with historical episodes, it's like, oh, okay, clearly the BBC, the Doctor Who team was able to raid the BBC costume department this week, so this is the story they're making.
Like
To
there's
have
no
it,
reason there's no real reason the Unquiet Dead, for example, needs to be a Charles
mm,
Dickens story. It
yeah,
just happens to be.
yeah. And I don't doubt there are more examples in the classic series for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, they like there's just a level of thought put into again, as I say, the very mature thematic treatment here that really sort of helps to elevate this story to a pretty magic place. It should be said.
Yeah.
Like every element is really working um, harmoniously and very powerfully. And I think maybe if you're not a average, like if you don't watch Doctor Who a lot, maybe there are some parts that could be off-putting, like the fact that it is a bit over the top. But even then, like the maturity and the power is interwoven into all the elements so well that it's still compelling, while also being distinctly Doctor Who, right? Like
Yeah, completely.
like you say that this is a story that can only happen once in Doctor Who, but I I mean, maybe outside of something like Star Trek, I can't imagine a story like this happening in many other series. It feels like
Yeah,
a very Doctor Who story, which is kind of great.
yeah, incredibly. Well, the main reason that I think you can only tell this story in Doctor Who is also with how they choose to examine the Doctor's character.
Mm,
And
mm,
we're now going to talk about by far one of the most um, referenced uh, discussion points of this story, and that is the fate of the family of blood
mm.
and the extremes that the Doctor goes to.
Yeah,
Um, Now, it's hinted at neatly, actually, in the previous scene when Timothy describes the Doctor in, like, he says, like, I was scared of him for this reason, this reason, this reason, this
yeah,
reason, and also he happens to be wonderful at the same time. It's
yeah,
not, like, it's such a great way of delivering, like, and describing the character.
yeah,
You know, like, he is a great person, but he's also all of these things at the same time.
yeah.
And again, the dichotomy that you were talking about in the thematic discussions of the episode earlier, perfectly on point in that monologue. Um,
Um,
and then we get
mm,
the montage. You know, the
yeah,
fury of the Time Lord. Um, the 10th Doctor being kind. We wanted to live forever, so the Doctor made sure that we did.
yeah,
Such, like, not only just pure fitting ends for these characters, like, who have,
mm,
and again, it helps that they've done like like such like morally reprehensible things that
yeah,
when they go through that stuff, at first you're like, you know, thank God they're gone. But then after that, you're like, wow, Jesus, even with all they did, this seems like
yeah,
agony and hell.
yeah,
um, Such a great, like, especially I think it starts with Daughter of Mine
mm,
when she's trapped in the mirror, but then like
mm,
it's another version of body horror of like Son of Mine's fate,
mm,
like just pure like suspended in time as a scarecrow forever, and like
mm,
the complete lack of remorse on the Doctor's face as he's doing
mm,
all of it.
yeah,
Like, it perfectly makes sense for the character. This is an enemy that has like pushed him to his breaking point, made him do things he has never done before. You know, murdered millions of people without a hint of remorse, and also like has made it personal and attacked people that he cares about.
yeah,
It absolutely makes sense that he would go to this team, and it's
yeah,
part of the reason why this character is so great.
yeah. It's
He is someone who can very easily go to this extreme, and the majority of the time chooses not to.
yeah. It's
That's why the Doctor is so great as a character.
yeah, for sure. I think we talk about gut punches, but that revelation, he was being kind, that it takes a second to kick in, or at least it does for me, but when it does, I'm like, wow, so this whole thing from the beginning could have gone a pretty different way.
Yeah,
Um and I mean it's kind of good that the Doctor didn't that he felt he didn't have to go that extreme from the beginning, but then we see the loss of life, and it's just all these little, you know, delicious little nuances, and as I say, dualities that kind of make it really strong.
yeah,
So that ending really is just kind of
and it doesn't,
smashes your soul. Really, it's
and it's so perfectly well placed, right?
oh
Because
yeah,
the moment, literally like seconds beforehand, the Doctor's return is something triumphant. You know,
yeah,
like when he stops pretending to be John Smith and snaps right back into the
mm,
Doctor, the sense of relief you feel where you're like, oh, he's back. Oh, he's back. Thank God he's back. And then
and that
immediately jumping into, holy shit, what is this man
mm,
doing? But then the scene that follows,
mm,
it's so great that we've just seen him do all of those things because it sets us up perfectly to relate to Nurse Redfern in this situation. Someone
mm,
who can barely look at the Doctor after what he's done. Someone who,
yeah,
you know, has felt this attachment to John Smith as a character and now knows that she'll never get him back. If
yeah,
we had not seen the Doctor do all that heavy shit, we probably might not be as on her side as
no,
we end up being.
no, for sure. And the fact that the Doctor kind of he almost tries to sort of hide again, right? Because he's like,
He
"Oh,
does, yeah.
come with me." It'll be fine. It doesn't even say something like, "Oh, maybe it could be just like before" or something like that. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
change.
He
But
tries he tries to like reason with Nurse Redfern in like superficial ways, being like, I'm capable of everything that John Smith was, and like
Yeah.
he even tries to be like, to if you look in my eyes, you'll see him there, and then she does look him in the eyes, and she says, no, actually, I think you'll find
Mm.
that you two are very different, and
Yeah.
I really hate you for the reasons I liked John Smith. It's
Yeah.
like I think I referenced it earlier in the episode, but it's the whole, if the Doctor never came here, would anyone here have died? On a whim, would anyone here have died? And he can't answer that because this is one of the situations where that's correct. The majority of the time, the Doctor brings destruction wherever he goes is really only a thing because he lands wherever destruction is imminent.
Mm.
But this is a situation where no, the family followed you here. If you hadn't landed here, no one here would have died, except for maybe that mother and her baby.
Yeah.
And scenes like this, where the Doctor is called out for like incredibly legitimate and like gut punching reasons, things like that are why Francine's behavior from 2 episodes ago, where she's talking about, like when she has just learned about the Doctor from Harold Saxon's minions and is like, Martha, stay away from him. He's a monster. He brings destruction wherever he goes. That's why those scenes in that episode feel even more hollow to me because, as I mentioned, that in that scenario, the Doctor did literally nothing wrong. And he's getting called out for this stuff. Here, he is absolutely justified for being called out for this stuff.
Yep.
And it affects you and the character on way more effective of a level than it ever did in the Lazarus Experiment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, when he says, oh, if you look at my eyes, you'll find John Smith. And you know what? Maybe that's true. Maybe there is still a bit of John Smith, but there's also a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff which, that Nurse Redfern, frankly, probably wouldn't be able to handle emotionally. And honestly, stuff that even the Doctor can't handle emotionally, right? Because he's now gone back to his emotionally repressive mindset. He thinks that, John Smith, yeah, maybe there's a bit more to me than that, but not much more. And there's no way there's like any sort of dark, horrifying dimensions to my personality. It's not like I went through a thing like a time war or anything. That couldn't have happened. So again, it's just all these layers to these characters, the Doctor in particular, that really make this story special, obviously, but just purely chilling.
Yeah, and it's such a layered and understanding like take on the Doctor. Like Paul Cornell is a writer who really understands this character.
Yeah, I'd agree. It actually, and also it makes sense that he's the one who wrote this because he wrote, as you say, Father's Day. But in that one, we also had that scene where the Doctor says, "Yeah, I wish I could have an ordinary life."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's just kind of great to see that come, if not full circle, then have it expanded in this story. It's really quite wonderful. And
yeah.
even the bit when he's pretending to be John Smith, there's a glorious kind of tension there because on one hand, in the moment, we're kind of scared, thinking, "Oh no, he's chosen the human form. Everyone's going to die. That's terrible." And then we get that great relief. It's like, "Oh no, the Doctor's back." But then, certainly when we're seeing the horrible things that he does to the family, but especially afterwards, we realize, oh, yeah, the Doctor's back. John Smith is gone, and so is the life that he could have lived. That's all. It's vanished.
Yeah,
And it's
and
that's heavy.
why, and
heavy
especially seeing the really brief montage of what John Smith's life would have been.
Yeah,
it makes it even more devastating.
Yeah,
and
it's almost like you imagine that maybe that was literally another timeline that maybe the Doctor could peer through because he's a Time Lord and he's got magic timey-wimey powers.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just makes it all the more devastating because you really think, yeah, this really could have been the situation, but as it is, that's not what we got. The Doctor made his choice and transformed, I guess.
Yep. Do you have anything more to say? I think I've laid it all out on the table.
one tiny little thing.
Sure.
When the doctor is talking about his parents, he says, "My father Sydney and
Yep.
my mother Verity." That just
Yep. It's
made me laugh.
real great Easter egg, as well as the Doctor using a cricket ball
Oh yeah,
in reference to the Fifth Doctor.
yeah. So again, like you can see all the thought coming through here. There was a bit that I wanted to sort of talk about with
Mm-hmm.
the, for want of a better term, the Doctor's Great speech slash speeches we get at the end here. I want to say, I don't know if I have the ability to really unpack this all now, but I want to say there's enough irony, particularly from Timothy's perspective, because he's only like a kid who's only trying to comprehend all the insane things that are happening around him. I want to say that the irony there makes those speeches certainly more compelling for me than in, later, particularly Moffat stories. But I think at this point, because we haven't reached the Moffat era yet, it's a bit too soon to tell.
Sure.
So hopefully by the time we get there, I'll remember this and think, "Oh, Seacuff, I knew it."
I think that more of those speeches in the Moffat era have a similar layer of irony on them. It's just not as overt. Like, because in this one, prior to that speech, we get Timothy saying like, "You're as bad as them" to the Doctor, referencing the family. So like he's going through that thing where it's like, he does think the Doctor's great, but also acknowledges the darker side.
He's going through that process.
Yeah, in the Moffat era, it's more that like the irony is present, but not from the perspective of the characters delivering the speeches, which makes the irony more present.
Yeah, that's not something I'm a fan of, but again, we'll get to that later.
Sure. Yeah, I think I've laid it all out on the table.
Yeah, I
was waiting for one of us to find a flaw or find a nitpick or anything like that, and
I really can't.
I don't think we did. It's a unique episode for the show and for media as a whole. Really amazing performances all around. One or two hokey CGI moments, but they're easily looked past.
Yep.
Really compelling thematic complexity. Really great character discussions. Emotional core that is very, very strong throughout. I'm calling it right now. It's taken us 80 plus episodes. I'm giving out my first 10.
Yeah, and I'm giving out my third.
This makes this episode the first in our podcast to get an average rating of 10. It's launched to the top of the overall medal table, right behind Dalek. And it very much deserves its position there.
Yeah, one of the, I think, absolutely, like the best episode of Revival Who that we've talked about. One of the best episodes of Revival Who ever, and maybe, and we'll see about this, I guess, maybe one of the best stories of Doctor Who, period. So,
well, 2 weeks from now we're reviewing Blink, which does tend to hold that position quite firmly for a lot of fans.
True.
So we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. But next time we're instead looking at the monster of Peladon.
Yeah, we're returning back
that
to.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, that'll be interesting time. So, stay tuned, folks.
Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And that was a fun Chameleon Arch, right? I bet we'll never see that again.